Addressing safety concerns in a facility requires a strategic approach, especially when dealing with potentially hazardous areas and non-compliance with the National Electrical Code, or NEC. Firstly, document violations by recording specific instances where the NEC articles and sections are not being followed. Be precise about what you have observed. Secondly, seek support from a trusted colleague. This could be a safety officer or a senior electrician who can validate your concerns and provide additional insight. Then request written confirmation from your boss acknowledging their awareness of the violations and their intent to address them. This creates a record of communication. If the company continues to ignore your concerns, consider contacting the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, to report the violations. Determining the classification of hazardous areas is crucial. 1. Consult with facility engineers or other qualified personnel who may already possess knowledge of the area classifications. 2. Conduct a thorough risk assessment, evaluating the processes and materials used to determine potential hazards. 3. Review historical data. Examine any available documentation or records that might provide information about previous classifications. It's important to explain to management the necessity of classifying hazardous areas under the NEC. This is vital to determine the appropriate electrical equipment and wiring methods to use, protect personnel from electrical hazards, and prevent explosions and fires. Highlight the potential consequences of violating the NEC, including legal liability for accidents or injuries, shutdowns or fines from OSHA, and potential damage to the company's reputation. Suggest a collaborative approach to addressing the classification issue. This could involve forming a task force consisting of electrical, engineering, and safety personnel. Hiring an outside consultant to conduct a professional risk assessment could be beneficial. Finally, develop and implement a plan for classifying the hazardous areas and ensuring NEC compliance. To protect your job, remain professional in all interactions. Avoid confrontational language or accusations. Instead, focus on the facts and the potential risks. Offer solutions and recommendations rather than simply complaining. Keep a record of your communications with management, including their responses. If necessary, seek advice from a labor lawyer or union representative to protect your rights. The NEC defines hazardous locations based on the properties of flammable liquids, gases, or vapors, and combustible dust or fibers that may be present. These locations are classified into different classes, divisions, and zones to specify the requirements for electrical equipment and wiring. Class I locations are those where flammable gases or vapors or may be present in the air in quantities sufficient to produce explosive or ignitable mixtures. Class Roman II locations are those where combustible dust is or may be present in the air in quantities sufficient to cause explosion or ignition. Class Roman III locations are those where easily ignitable fibers or materials producing combustible flames are handled, manufactured, or used. Divisions indicate the probability of a hazardous material being present. Division 1 means a hazardous material is present under normal operating conditions. Division 2 means a hazardous material is present only under abnormal conditions such as equipment failure. Zones are used in conjunction with Class I locations as an alternative to the division system. Zone 0 is a location where ignitable concentrations of flammable gases, vapors, or liquids are present continuously or for long periods. Zone 1 is a location where ignitable concentrations are likely to exist under normal operating conditions. Zone 2 is a location where ignitable concentrations are not likely to occur under normal operating conditions. Equipment designed for hazardous locations must be specifically listed and labeled for the class, division, or zone for which it is intended. This equipment is designed to prevent ignition of the hazardous material. Explosion-proof enclosures are designed to contain an internal explosion without causing an external hazard. Intrinsically safe equipment is designed with limited energy to prevent ignition. Seal-offs are used in conduit systems to prevent the passage of gases, vapors, or flames from one portion of the electrical system to another. They are required in Class I, Division 1 and 2 locations, and Class Roman II, Division 1 and 2 locations. Flexible explosion-proof conduits are used to provide flexibility in wiring systems in hazardous locations. They must be specifically listed for use in hazardous locations and properly installed. When working in hazardous locations, it is important to follow all applicable codes and standards, including the NEC. Only qualified personnel should perform electrical work in hazardous locations. Always use approved equipment and wiring methods. Inspect equipment regularly for damage or deterioration. Never bypass or disable safety features. In existing facilities, changes in processes, materials, or equipment may affect the classification of hazardous areas. It is important to review the classification regularly and update it as necessary. If you are unsure about the classification of a hazardous area, consult with a qualified professional. When documenting violations, be specific and include the following information: the date and time of the observation, a description of the violation, the location of the violation, the NEC article and section number that is being violated, any photographs or videos of the violation. When seeking support, talk to your supervisor, your safety officer, or another qualified professional. Explain your concerns and ask for their help in addressing the violations. When requesting written confirmation, send a written request to your supervisor outlining the violations and asking for their assurance that they will be addressed. Keep a copy of the request for your records. When contacting OSHA, you can file a complaint online or by phone. You will need to provide OSHA with the following information: your name and contact information, the name and address of your employer, a description of the violations, any supporting documentation such as photographs or videos. OSHA will investigate your complaint and take appropriate action. This may include issuing citations to your employer and requiring them to correct the violations. When conducting a risk assessment, you will need to identify the potential hazards, assess the likelihood of an accident occurring, and evaluate the potential consequences of an accident. Use a risk assessment matrix to help you determine the level of risk. When reviewing historical data, look for any previous risk assessments, hazardous area classifications, or incident reports. This information can help you understand the potential hazards in the area. When explaining the necessity of classification to management, emphasize the legal and financial consequences of non-compliance. Also explain that classifying hazardous areas is essential for protecting the safety of employees and preventing accidents. When suggesting a collaborative approach, emphasize the importance of involving all stakeholders in the process. This will help to ensure that the classification is accurate and that all concerns are addressed. When remaining professional, avoid making personal attacks or accusations. Instead, focus on the facts and the potential risks. Be respectful and courteous even when you disagree with management. When offering solutions, be prepared to offer specific recommendations for addressing the violations. This will show that you are serious about resolving the issue and that you are willing to work with management to find a solution. When documenting interactions, keep a log of all conversations and meetings with management. Include the date, time, participants, and a summary of the discussion. When seeking external support, contact a labor lawyer or union representative. They can advise you of your rights and help you to protect your job. Remember to consult with the latest edition of the NEC and other relevant codes and standards to ensure compliance. Stay informed about changes in regulations and best practices. Implement a regular training program for employees who work in hazardous locations. By taking these steps, you can help to ensure that your facility is in compliance with the NEC and that your employees are protected from electrical hazards. Remember to consider the specific characteristics of the paints used, including whether they are oil-based or waterborne, and the presence of any solvents or thinners. Also, take into account the ventilation system and the presence of any sources of ignition. If you are unsure about the classification of a hazardous area, it is always best to err on the side of caution and classify it as more hazardous. This will help to ensure that the electrical equipment and wiring methods are adequate to protect against explosions and fires. If the facility has undergone changes over the past 25 years, it is likely that the hazardous area classifications need to be updated. It is important to conduct a new risk assessment and reclassify the areas as necessary. When making repairs in hazardous locations, always energize the equipment before starting work. Use only approved tools and equipment. Follow all safety procedures. If you find any damaged or defective equipment, such as broken seal-offs or worn flexible conduits, replace it immediately with approved equipment. Do not attempt to repair damaged equipment in hazardous locations. This can create a fire or explosion hazard. If you are not qualified to perform electrical work in hazardous locations, do not attempt to do so. Contact a qualified electrician. It is important to remember that electrical safety is everyone's responsibility. If you see something that is unsafe, report it to your supervisor or safety officer. By working together, we can create a safe and healthy workplace for everyone. Furthermore, consider the specific requirements for grounding and bonding in hazardous locations. Grounding and bonding are essential for preventing the buildup of static electricity, which can be a source of ignition. Ensure that all electrical equipment is properly grounded and bonded in accordance with the NEC. Use only approved grounding and bonding methods. Inspect grounding and bonding connections regularly for corrosion or damage. Repair or replace any damaged connections immediately. Also, consider the specific requirements for overcurrent protection in hazardous locations. Overcurrent protection devices, such as circuit breakers and fuses, are designed to protect electrical equipment from damage due to overload or short circuits. Ensure that all electrical equipment is protected by properly sized overcurrent protection devices. Use only approved overcurrent protection devices. Inspect overcurrent protection devices regularly for proper operation. Replace any defective devices immediately. In addition to the NEC, there may be other applicable codes and standards that you need to follow. These may include local building codes, fire codes, and OSHA regulations. Be sure to familiarize yourself with all applicable codes and standards before performing any electrical work in hazardous locations. If you have any questions about electrical safety, contact a qualified electrician or electrical engineer. It is also important to consider the specific requirements for lighting in hazardous locations. Lighting fixtures used in hazardous locations must be specifically designed and listed for that purpose. Use only approved lighting fixtures in hazardous locations. Ensure that the lighting fixtures are properly installed and maintained. Inspect lighting fixtures regularly for damage or deterioration. Replace any damaged or defective lighting fixtures immediately. Also, consider the specific requirements for motor control centers in hazardous locations. Motor control centers are used to control and protect electric motors. Motor control centers used in hazardous locations must be specifically designed and listed for that purpose. Ensure that the motor control centers are properly installed and maintained. Inspect motor control centers regularly for damage or deterioration. Replace any damaged or defective motor control centers immediately. Moreover, think about the specific requirements for instrumentation and control systems in hazardous locations. Instrumentation and control systems are used to monitor and control industrial processes. Instrumentation and control systems used in hazardous locations must be specifically designed and listed for that purpose. Ensure that the instrumentation and control systems are properly installed and maintained. Inspect instrumentation and control systems regularly for damage or deterioration. Replace any damaged or defective instrumentation and control systems immediately. Also, remember the specific requirements for telecommunications systems in hazardous locations. Telecommunications systems are used for communication and data transmission. Telecommunications systems used in hazardous locations must be specifically designed and listed for that purpose. Ensure that the telecommunications systems are properly installed and maintained. Inspect telecommunications systems regularly for damage or deterioration. Replace any damaged or defective telecommunications systems immediately. Keep in mind the specific requirements for fire alarm systems in hazardous locations. Fire alarm systems are used to detect and warn of fires. Fire alarm systems used in hazardous locations must be specifically designed and listed for that purpose. Ensure that the fire alarm systems are properly installed and maintained. Inspect fire alarm systems regularly for proper operation. Replace any defective fire alarm systems immediately. Also, be aware of the specific requirements for cathodic protection systems in hazardous locations. Cathodic protection systems are used to prevent corrosion of metal structures. Cathodic protection systems used in hazardous locations must be specifically designed and listed for that purpose. Ensure that the cathodic protection systems are properly installed and maintained. Inspect cathodic protection systems regularly for proper operation. Replace any defective cathodic protection systems immediately. Moreover, understand the specific requirements for welding and cutting in hazardous locations. Welding and cutting can create sparks and hot surfaces that can ignite flammable materials. Welding and cutting should only be performed in hazardous locations under strict safety precautions. Ensure that all flammable materials are removed from the area before welding or cutting. Use a fire watch to monitor the area for sparks and hot surfaces. Have a fire extinguisher readily available. Also, learn about the specific requirements for the storage and handling of flammable materials in hazardous locations. Flammable material should be stored in approved containers. The containers should be properly labeled. The storage area should be well ventilated. No smoking should be allowed in the storage area. Consider the specific requirements for housekeeping in hazardous locations. Keep the area clean and free of combustible materials. Clean up any spills immediately. Properly dispose of waste materials. Remember the specific requirements for training in hazardous locations. All employees who work in hazardous locations should be properly trained in the hazards of the area and the safety procedures to follow. The training should be provided regularly. The training should be documented. Furthermore, think about the specific requirements for personal protective equipment, or PPE, in hazardous locations. Employees who work in hazardous locations should wear appropriate PPE such as safety glasses, gloves, and respirators. The PPE should be properly fitted and maintained. Also, remember the importance of regular inspections in hazardous locations. Conduct regular inspections of the area to identify any potential hazards. Take corrective action to eliminate the hazards. Document the inspections. Consider the use of a hazardous area classification drawing. This drawing shows the boundaries of the hazardous areas in the facility. The drawing should be kept up to date. The drawing should be readily available to employees. Remember the importance of communication. Communicate the hazards of the area to all employees. Communicate the safety procedures to follow. Encourage employees to report any potential hazards. Also, be aware of the emergency procedures in hazardous locations. Know what to do in case of a fire or explosion. Know how to evacuate the area safely. Know who to contact in case of an emergency. In summary, working safely in hazardous locations requires knowledge, training, and vigilance. By following the NEC and other applicable codes and standards, and by taking the necessary safety precautions, you can help to prevent accidents and protect the safety of yourself and your coworkers. Furthermore, consider the implications of using unclassified equipment in a classified area. Using equipment not rated for the specific hazardous location is a direct violation of the NEC and poses a significant risk of ignition. The energy levels, surface temperatures, and enclosure integrity of unclassified equipment are not guaranteed to prevent explosions or fires in the presence of flammable substances. Moreover, recognize the role of third-party testing and certification in ensuring equipment safety. Organizations like UL-FM, CSA, and others provide independent testing and certification services to verify that electrical equipment meets the stringent requirements for use in hazardous locations. Equipment bearing the mark of one of these organizations provides a level of assurance that it has been rigorously tested and found to be safe for its intended use. Also, remember the importance of maintaining the integrity of explosion-proof enclosures. Explosion-proof enclosures are designed to contain an internal explosion and prevent it from propagating to the surrounding atmosphere. These enclosures rely on precise machining and robust construction to achieve their protective function. Any damage to the enclosure, such as cracks, corrosion, or missing bolts, can compromise its integrity and render it ineffective. Consider the impact of modifications or alterations to listed equipment. Any modifications or alterations to listed equipment, even seemingly minor ones, can void the listing and create a safety hazard. Listed equipment is tested and certified in its original configuration, and any changes can alter its performance characteristics and compromise its safety. Also, remember the importance of proper wiring methods in hazardous locations. The NEC specifies specific wiring methods for use in hazardous locations, such as rigid metal conduit, intermediate metal conduit, and cable with a gas/vapor-tight continuous sheath. These wiring methods are designed to prevent the escape of flammable substances and to provide a safe path for fault currents. Moreover, consider the use of intrinsically safe circuits in hazardous locations. Intrinsically safe circuits are designed to limit the energy available to a level that is too low to ignite flammable substances. This approach is particularly useful for instrumentation and control circuits where the energy levels are inherently low. Also, be aware of the requirements for bonding and grounding in hazardous locations. Proper bonding and grounding are essential for preventing the buildup of static electricity and for providing a low impedance path for fault currents. The NEC specifies specific requirements for bonding and grounding in hazardous locations to minimize the risk of ignition. Consider the impact of dust accumulation on electrical equipment in Class Roman II locations. Dust accumulation can insulate electrical equipment and prevent it from dissipating heat properly, leading to overheating and potential ignition. Regular cleaning and maintenance are essential to prevent dust accumulation and maintain equipment safety. Also, remember the importance of proper ventilation in hazardous locations. Adequate ventilation can help to dilute the concentration of flammable substances and reduce the risk of ignition. The NEC specifies requirements for ventilation in certain hazardous locations. Moreover, consider the use of gas detectors in hazardous locations. Gas detectors can provide an early warning of the presence of flammable gases or vapors. They can be used to trigger alarms or to shut down equipment to prevent an explosion. Also, be aware of the requirements for hot work permits in hazardous locations. A hot work permit is a written authorization that is required before performing any hot work, such as welding or cutting, in a hazardous location. The permit specifies the precautions that must be taken to prevent a fire or explosion. Consider the use of purged and pressurized enclosures in hazardous locations. Purged and pressurized enclosures are designed to prevent flammable substances from entering the enclosure. The enclosure is either purged with clean air or pressurized with an inert gas to maintain a safe atmosphere inside. Also, remember the importance of regular training for employees who work in hazardous locations. Employees should be trained on the hazards of the area, the safety procedures to follow, and the proper use of PPE. The training should be provided regularly and documented. Moreover, consider the use of a management of change, or MOC, process to ensure that changes to processes, equipment, or materials are properly evaluated and controlled. An MOC process can help to prevent unintended consequences that could create a safety hazard. Also, be aware of the requirements for emergency shutdown systems in hazardous locations. Emergency shutdown systems are designed to quickly shut down equipment in the event of an emergency, such as a fire or explosion. Consider the use of intrinsically safe barriers in hazardous locations. Intrinsically safe barriers are devices that limit the energy available in a circuit to a level that is too low to ignite flammable substances. They are typically used in conjunction with intrinsically safe equipment. Also, remember the importance of proper labeling of equipment and wiring in hazardous locations. Equipment and wiring should be clearly labeled to indicate the hazardous location for which they are approved. This helps to ensure that the correct equipment is used in the correct location. Moreover, consider the use of a hazardous area classification team to conduct risk assessments and determine the appropriate classifications for different areas of the facility. The team should include representatives from engineering, safety, operations, and maintenance. Also, be aware of the requirements for periodic inspections of hazardous locations. Regular inspections should be conducted to identify any potential hazards and to verify that equipment and wiring are properly installed and maintained. Consider the use of a computerized maintenance management system, or CMMS, to track maintenance activities and to ensure that equipment is properly maintained. A CMMS can help to prevent equipment failures that could create a safety hazard. Also, remember the importance of continuous improvement. Regularly review safety procedures and practices to identify areas for improvement. Encourage employees to suggest ideas for improving safety. Moreover, consider the use of a safety management system to provide a framework for managing safety risks. A safety management system should include elements such as hazard identification, risk assessment, risk control, training, and emergency preparedness. Also, be aware of the resources available from organizations such as OSHA, the National Fire Protection Association, or NFPA, and the International Society of Automation, or ISA. These organizations provide guidance, training, and other resources to help companies improve safety in hazardous locations.